The notification came at 11:37 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been checking my phone obsessively for 2 hours, waiting for it. Not a text, not a call. A single photo in the family group chat, my brother standing in front of a brand new food truck, grinning, holding a pair of oversized scissors above a red ribbon. My mother had added 4 heart emojis and the words "so proud of my boy." I was sitting in a surgical waiting area at Mercy General Hospital in Cincinnati, still in my scrubs, 40 minutes from being announced as the youngest nurse practitioner in the hospital's cardiology unit to receive the Davenport Excellence Award. My name was going to be read aloud in front of 200 people. There was a plaque with my name engraved on it. I had mentioned the ceremony to my family 6 times in the past 3 weeks. The food truck had a name painted on the side in orange bubble letters. Marcus Eats. My brother had been talking about opening it for 2 years. He had never once worked a day in a professional kitchen. I put my phone face down on the seat beside me and sat very still for a moment. The way you do when something confirms what you already suspected but hoped you were wrong about. Then I picked it up again, opened the group chat, and typed, "Ceremony starts at noon. Room 4B, just in case anyone is nearby." I watched the 2 gray check marks appear, neither turned blue for a long time. My supervisor knocked on the waiting room door at 11:52. "They're ready for you," she said. I stood up, straightened my badge, and walked into the auditorium. Before I go further, I want to tell you something about my family that will help the rest of this make sense. My parents are not cruel people. I want to be precise about that because the easier version of the story would cast them as villains, and the truth is more complicated and more painful than that. They are people who fell in love with my brother's loudness the way some parents do, not because they didn't love me, but because he needed more visible tending. And visible tending became habit. And habit became a kind of architecture that the whole family lived inside without noticing it had been built. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. The older of 2 children, the quieter one. The one who made things easier without being asked. My brother Marcus is 4 years younger and has the specific energy of someone who has never once doubted that the room wanted to hear from him. I don't say that with bitterness, it's just accurate. Growing up, the math in our house was simple. Marcus's needs were visible and urgent. Mine were manageable and therefore managed by me. When I got a 4.0 in my junior year of high school, my father said, "That's my girl," and went back to watching the game. When Marcus passed his driver's test on the 3rd attempt, my mother made his favorite dinner and called my grandmother to report the news. I am not exaggerating this. I have the memory in high resolution. I tell you this not to build a case against them, but because I need you to understand that by the time I walked across that stage at Mercy General and accepted a crystal plaque with my name on it, I had already spent a decade quietly adjusting my expectations downward so that the distance between what I hoped for and what showed up wouldn't knock me over. I had gotten very good at the adjustment. I barely noticed doing it anymore. What I noticed that day, standing at the podium while the department head read my biography aloud: 8 years of nursing, 3 certifications, a research paper on post-cardiac event recovery protocols in underinsured patients that had been cited twice in peer-reviewed journals, was that the adjusting had started to cost me something I couldn't name yet. The auditorium had maybe 40 family members scattered through it, waiting for their people. I had asked a colleague named Donna to sit in my row so it wouldn't be entirely empty. Donna clapped the loudest. She brought a small bouquet from the hospital gift shop and handed it to me afterward and said, "You should be very proud of yourself." I thanked her. I meant it completely. That evening I drove home with the plaque on my passenger seat, and I thought about the food truck photos, which by then had accumulated 23 likes and a string of comments in the family group chat that I had stopped reading. I thought about the fact that I had told my parents about this ceremony on the phone, twice, and in a text with the address included. My mother had said both times, "We'll try our best, sweetheart." My father had said, "That's a long drive. Columbus to Cincinnati is 1 hour and 47 minutes on a clear day." I did not cry on the drive home. I want to note that because the absence of tears felt important. I think I had simply arrived somewhere past the point where disappointment produces that particular response. What I felt instead was a kind of cold clarity, like a window being cleaned from the outside. I had been accepted into a nurse practitioner fellowship at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago 14 months earlier. It was a 2-year program, specialized, competitive, the kind of position that gets mentioned in the same sentence as words like pipeline and future department leadership. I had turned it down because my mother had said, somewhat indirectly, that she didn't know what they'd do if I moved away. My father had a knee surgery coming up. Marcus was going through what they described as a difficult period, which was a phrase our family used to mean he needed more than his usual share of everyone's attention. I had called Northwestern Memorial and declined the fellowship from my childhood bedroom, sitting on the same twin bed I had slept in since middle school, looking at the same glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that I had never bothered to take down. Sitting in my car in Cincinnati with a plaque on my passenger seat and a family group chat full of orange bubble letters, I made 2 decisions. The first was that I was going to call Northwestern Memorial in the morning and ask whether the fellowship had any current openings or equivalent opportunities. The second was that I was going to stop arranging my life around the ambient possibility that my family would one day show up in the way I had always hoped. I called the fellowship coordinator at Northwestern the next morning. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she remembered me, which I had not expected. She said there was no open spot in the current cohort, but that a second position had just been approved for the following cycle, starting in 4 months. Was I still interested? I said yes before she finished the question. I gave Mercy General my notice 2 weeks later. My supervisor sat with me for 40 minutes in her office and said she thought it was the right move and that she wanted to write me the strongest letter of recommendation she had ever written. I told her that meant more than she probably knew. I told my parents on a Sunday phone call, the kind we had every week, the kind where my mother updated me on Marcus and my father watched football in the background and asked occasional questions that made it clear he had not been listening. I told them I had accepted a fellowship in Chicago. I told them I was moving in 6 weeks. I told them I was genuinely excited. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "But you just got that award at your hospital. Why would you leave now?" I said it was a significant career opportunity that I had been waiting a long time for. She said, "Marcus is really getting the truck off the ground. He's going to need support from the family." I said, "I know. I hope it goes well for him." There was a pause that had a particular texture I had learned to recognize over the years. The pause that preceded the reframe, where my choices got quietly repositioned as something being done to the family rather than for myself. My father came on the line. "Chicago's expensive," he said. "You sure about this?" I told him I was sure. He said, "Don't go getting too big for your britches up there." He said it lightly, the way he said most things. But I sat with it for a long time after we hung up. I packed my apartment in 11 days. On the 12th, I loaded a rental truck with the help of 2 friends and a neighbor I barely knew who saw me struggling with a bookcase and simply showed up with a screwdriver. I want to tell you about that neighbor because I think about him sometimes. His name was Gerald. He was 60-something, retired, and he had lived across the hall for 2 years and we had exchanged maybe 30 words in that time. He helped me carry boxes for 3 hours, refused coffee twice, and when I thanked him at the end said only, "Good luck in Chicago. It's a real city." Then he went back inside. Some people give you exactly what you need for exactly as long as you need it and ask for nothing. I have started to notice these people more than I used to. Chicago suited me. That is the most efficient way to say it. Northwestern Memorial is the kind of institution that assumes you are capable until you prove otherwise, which is the opposite of how I had been treated for most of my professional life, where competence was noted quietly while loudness got the celebration. My fellowship cohort had 4 other practitioners. We ate lunch together almost every day in a basement cafeteria that had no windows and too much fluorescent light, and I found myself looking forward to it in a way I hadn't looked forward to anything in a long time. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park with a window that faced east and a radiator that sounded like an old man clearing his throat every morning. I put the Davenport Award plaque on a shelf in the hallway where I could see it from the kitchen. I bought plants. 3 of them died. The fourth one is still alive, and I consider this a reasonable outcome. For the first 4 months in Chicago, my family contact was minimal and surface level. My mother called on Sundays. We talked about the weather, about Marcus's truck, about my father's knee. She asked occasionally about my job in the vague way she always had, as if she understood the general outline but not the actual content. I answered briefly. Neither of us pressed. Then, in my 5th month at Northwestern, something happened that I have thought about almost every day since. I was reviewing a case file for a patient who had been admitted through the ER with what looked initially like a straightforward cardiac event, elevated troponin, some ST changes, textbook presentation. But something in the intake pattern felt slightly off to me. The patient was 53, no prior cardiac history, non-smoker, moderate activity level, diet that didn't flag anything obvious. I pulled his medication list and cross-referenced it with a nutritional supplement log his wife had brought in. He was taking 3 supplements he had ordered online. One of them had come up twice in the past year in voluntary adverse event reports, a third-party database that our hospital had recently started incorporating into our intake review process. The supplement was distributed by a regional company that supplied several Midwest health food chains. The adverse event reports were vague. Fatigue, cardiac irregularities, nothing that had triggered a formal FDA action. But the timing in both prior cases matched this patient's symptom onset within a close enough window to be significant. I brought it to the attending physician. She looked at the cross-reference for about 90 seconds and said, "Good catch. Let's run a full panel and get him off everything non-prescribed immediately." The patient was stabilized. He went home 4 days later with a different medication regimen and instructions to return every supplement he owned to the store. Afterward, I sat with the adverse event data for a long time. I ran the distributor name through the public FDA database and found a pattern I had not been looking for. 4 other cases over 18 months, different products, different retailers, same regional distributor. Informal inquiries by state health departments, no formal action. No recall. The distributor's name was Crane Health Supply out of Indianapolis. My brother's food truck sourced several of its specialty items: protein powders, herbal blends, a proprietary energy mix he sold as an add-on through a wholesale partnership he had mentioned to me once in passing about 8 months earlier. I had not paid particular attention at the time. I had been in the middle of packing boxes, and he had been excited about finding a cheap bulk supplier. I sat with that connection for 2 full days before I did anything about it. I want to be honest about what those 2 days felt like, because the instinct to protect your family runs deeper than logic, and I would be lying if I told you I did not feel it pulling at me. I felt it clearly. And then I thought about the 53-year-old man who had come in through my ER and almost been sent home with a standard cardiac workup while the actual problem remained in his supplement cabinet. I thought about how many other people were buying energy mixes from a food truck in Columbus, Ohio, trusting that the ingredients were safe because they came from someone friendly who knew their name. I called Marcus directly, not my parents. "Marcus." He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding like he was in the middle of something loud. I asked him to step somewhere quieter. He did, which surprised me. When the background noise faded, I told him what I had found. I kept it factual and plain. I told him about the adverse event pattern, the distributor, the FDA database. I told him I thought the responsible action was to stop using the Crane products immediately and to contact the distributor in writing asking for third-party testing documentation. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're doing this because of the ceremony, aren't you?" I had expected something like this. I had even prepared for it. But hearing it still landed harder than I thought it would. The way a thing you've anticipated can still catch you off guard when it arrives with its actual weight. I said, "I'm doing this because someone came into my hospital in cardiac distress and the trail leads to a distributor your supplier is connected to. That's why I'm doing this." He said, "This is going to tank everything right when I'm finally getting traction." I said, "It will be worse if someone gets sick at your truck and you knew about a possible problem." He said nothing. I said, "I'm not reporting anything. I'm calling you first because you're my brother. But Marcus, you need to act on this." Another long silence. Then, I'll think about it. He did not call me back for 4 days. When he did, he told me he had contacted his wholesale rep and asked for documentation. The rep had provided something vague and unconvincing. Marcus had stopped using the Crane products 3 days earlier. He did not thank me. He did not apologize. But he said, "I pulled the stuff." And I understood that was as much as I was going to get. I documented the adverse event pattern independently and submitted a report to the FDA's MedWatch system through our hospital's compliance office. The attending physician filed a parallel report. Together, they created what the compliance coordinator described as a sufficiently corroborated pattern for escalated review. The FDA investigation that followed was quiet and thorough. I was not a central figure in it. I was one data point. But Crane Health Supply received a warning letter 6 months later, followed by a mandatory recall of 3 product lines and a suspension of 2 distribution licenses. The story made regional news in Indiana and Ohio. My mother called me when she saw it. "Marcus said you were involved," she said. I told her I had filed a voluntary adverse event report. I told her I had called Marcus first because I thought he deserved the chance to address it himself, and he had. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He was really upset with you for a while." I said, "I know." She said, "He thinks you overreacted." I held the phone and looked at the east-facing window and a late November light coming through it, and I thought about the 53-year-old man going home to his wife with a different medication regimen. I thought about the ceremony, the plaque, the drive back to Cincinnati with the empty passenger seat beside me. I thought about the fellowship I had turned down 3 years earlier so that my family would not have to manage without me, and how fully they had managed without me anyway. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. Not about Marcus. About us." She said, "Okay." I told her that I had spent a very long time believing that if I was consistent enough and patient enough and available enough, the way our family worked would eventually shift into something that made room for me. I told her I had turned down a fellowship to stay close because I thought proximity mattered to her. I told her I had looked at my phone in a surgical waiting room 40 minutes before an award ceremony and felt the specific loneliness of being the one person who understood something was important. I said all of this very calmly and without raising my voice, and I meant every word. My mother did not interrupt. When I finished, she said, "I didn't know you turned down a fellowship." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "You should have told us." I said, "Yes, I should have." There was a long pause. She said, "I don't always know how to show up for you the way I should. I know that." She said it quietly, and it was the most honest sentence I had heard from her in years. Not an apology, not a full accounting, but honest, and I have learned to take honesty when it arrives rather than hold out for the version I had wanted. I said, "I know. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm just asking for something real." We talked for a long time after that. Not about Marcus, not about the food truck, not about the FDA. About smaller things. About what I remembered from when I was 7 and she had driven me to a science fair at 5 in the morning because my project needed refrigeration and the school didn't open until 8. About how she used to leave notes in my lunch that said things like, "You are very smart and I see you working hard." She had done those things. They were real. I had not forgotten them. I am not telling you this family has been fixed. It has not. My father called me 3 weeks later with a version of the story where I had tried to sabotage Marcus's business out of jealousy, and I told him plainly that I disagreed and that the conversation wasn't one I was willing to have on those terms, and I ended the call. We have not spoken since in any substantial way. Marcus sent me a text in December that said, "Truck is still open. Figured you'd want to know." I replied that I was glad. He sent a thumbs up. We have not moved beyond that. But I think we might. Slowly, eventually, in the way that things between siblings sometimes do. My mother and I talk every couple of weeks. The conversations are careful, like walking on ground that is still settling after something has shifted underneath it. But they are real in a way they weren't before. I will take that. What I want to tell you. And I mean this for anyone who has spent years being the one who shows up, who adjusts, who waits quietly for the recognition that keeps getting redirected somewhere louder, is that at a certain point, the waiting becomes its own kind of disappearing. You stop taking up the space you're owed because you have learned not to expect it. And the tragedy is not what your family does or doesn't do. The tragedy is how well you learn to make yourself smaller to accommodate it. My fellowship ends in 7 months. I have already been asked whether I am interested in a permanent position on the cardiology team. I said I would think about it. I have been thinking about it every morning when I make coffee and watch the east light come through the window and listen to the radiator complain. The plaque is still on the shelf in the hallway. I pass it every day. Some days I barely notice it. Some days I stop and look at my name on it for a moment. The name I was given. The name I chose to keep even when everything else changed. And I think about the 53-year-old man who went home to his wife. I think about Gerald with the screwdriver. I think about Donna and the gift shop flowers. I think about my mother's voice saying, "I see you working hard," on a piece of paper folded into a sandwich bag. People are not entirely what they fail to do, but they are also not entirely absolved by what they once did right. Holding both of those things at the same time is the actual work. Nobody told me it would be the hardest kind. So here is what I want to leave you with. If you have been the one in your family who makes things easier, who asks for less, who adjusts the expectation so the disappointment doesn't break you, I want you to consider what you have been trading for that protection. Not the big things, the small ones. The fellowships declined, the drives not taken, the phone face down in the waiting room. What did those cost you and who exactly were you paying? Because the answer to that question, when you finally let yourself look at it directly, is not a wound. It is a map. And you are allowed to follow it somewhere new.